Tink actually is a
You know what?
fabulous segue into our topic.
She is like
Because she
Tinkerbell's
needs
nerves.
Her nerves.
Yes.
Her anxiety.
What are we talking about today, Anna Grace Smith?
I feel like I need something very green to hold or insert in this video because we are talking about marijuana, CBD, hemp, all things green.
All things green.
All things green.
And if Christians should indulge, and yeah.
Yes! We find that we talk about this topic often.
Well, because we talk about pot all the time.
We talk
right?
about pot all the time. But is that even a bad thing?
No, it isn't. No, we don't talk about it all the time. We talk about, we do talk about my hay mow all the time for my cows. But we do talk about, particularly now that there have been states that have legalized marijuana.
Wasn't there one just the other week who legalized it?
I don't know.
I was thinking, I can't remember now which one.
I don't know. It's probably...
was it Ohio?
Oh, no, they did some abortion issues that were.
But I thought
they may have put that. I don't know. I'm pretty sure Virginia has. I don't know. Well, I know definitely Colorado. Now the problem. Well, let's not get to the problem yet. What do we think about marijuana? And we want to be very, very careful because there's lots of people smoking. We're just going to say smoking pot because, I'm not going to say cannabis because you can mix that up with cannabis sativa or however you say that.
That's fancy terminology.
It's like CBD and all this, and there's difference between the two. But the marijuana pot, it can be laced with other ingredients and has obviously caused result in an overwhelming barrage of death. So we're not talking about it like that. We're not talking about the fentanyl that is in there that is killing kids because that's really factual and that's very true.
Right.
That part we're not dealing with,
right?
Because that is
or other recreational drugs.
Yes,
marijuana specifically.
Right, but even that can be dangerous. In other words, you need to know who your supplier is, right?
Right.
I mean, and that's true of foods. That's true of everything, Well,
they were having this conversation too because I asked the same question and talked a bit about it on my Instagram story yesterday. That there are these topics, and especially with marijuana and even smoking marijuana, that there's really one extreme or another. You have one group of people that sees basically everything as permissible. It's allowable, it's good, and then there's the other end of the spectrum, and oftentimes I've personally found in like church culture or among believers where it's automatically wrong, and but no one actually can really say why. Or I'll hear the same scripture being used, but maybe it's not that the scripture is cliche, but how it's being used really isn't answering the question. It has nothing to do with the 21st century issue, if that makes sense. And I think that there's so many controversial topics in the 21st century that the Bible doesn't literally specify. The iPhones are not in the Bible. No. Hemp, to my knowledge, unless there's somewhere, maybe in the Daniel fast, there's like hemp seed. I don't know.
I mean, there is definitely, herb treatments, and I don't think they're in the Bible as much, but yeah. I mean, hyssop, in Psalm 51, hyssop is, I believe, a herb. And so, I mean, there are herbals mentioned. I think the point, there's just so many ways to break this down. So we're not talking necessarily recreational. We also, I think as Christians, know that we have to abide by the law. So if your state says no, your state says no. And some states say yes. But then you've got the overwhelming problem of, I think, the federal code is different. And it's still a scheduled drug. So you've got all this interwoven mess of whatever. But I do know there was one circumstance, and this is why we're probably talking about this beyond other things, is there was a relative in my family who supposedly got some tainted pot. I'm just going to say pot because it's shorter, and I want to make, I think,
Yeah.
I grew up in the Cheech and Chong era, but it was supposedly tainted with something, which led to a psychosis issue. Something very serious. But the deal is, in all this, no one could. It's anti-resistant to psychotic medicine, and if this person ingests something like this, what it does to them when they don't know where it's coming from versus if they had grown it. And you can't do, in the state she was in is legalized. So I'm a little curious, and my mind's kind of drawing a blank on it because I still feel very overwhelmed by what happened to her. It was real. It was nasty. But along the text thread that we were in, our whole family, there was, if it were just legalized, we wouldn't have this problem. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's a question. That's a really good question. Like, is that true? It seems, I mean, you think about, I mean, I grew up, I am most undoubtedly sure that somewhere down in my history on a certain side of the family that we were moonshiners, and I mean, we lived way deep in the country, and I have no doubt during the Prohibition, we were there were relatives either drinking moonshine or making it. And, people will find a way to get around that. And and then after Prohibition, of course they get all sorts of ABC stores and all that whatnot going. But I don't know. I don't know the answers. It just seems to me it was interesting coming from this person because this person is not a marijuana smoker. But at the same time, she was like, would that take the relief? Would that make the substance where it's just commonly treated like a herb? Like I love growing herbs. I have all sorts out there, thyme, I have them all. And some of them you can't, you have to be careful with because you don't want them to interact with other animals that you have on the farm. So I don't know.
Do you think that with marijuana, the context and purpose of it, do you think there are layers to it besides, it's just being legalized so people can get high from it?
I think there's an element.
It's
I mean, it's
weed
just like
is the hierarchy, and then you have all these
it is
categories of it. Because here's the thing that I find: most believers who I personally know, there are a few who say yes, legalize it. Most, and again, this is just in my personal circle. I'm not saying this is for all believers or trying to make a generalization, but they say no, it shouldn't be legalized, and the assumption is automatically that people are just using it to get high. Right. But then I also even question: is it wrong to get buzzed or high? We know even biblically, alcoholism, drunkenness, which I think isn't so much the idea of just taking a drink and the drunkenness itself, but what it's doing to your mind, the lack of self-control, the lack of those like fruits of the spirit, and a sound mind, if you will. But my question is also, is it inherently wrong? Is it morally wrong to smoke pot and get high? But also, what if you take a hit, when you become more resistant to it, and you use it for anxiety or relaxation purposes, instead of, say, a Xanax.
I know.
Or
I know
it
gets
right.
Really...
You go into these drugs where we have an opioid crisis.
Right. Yes.
Prescribe. You can take a blunt, and you can take a prescribed painkiller.
Oh, you know the word. I'm.
Okay,
we used to call them joints back in the day.
Well, I learned that there's a difference between a blunt and a joint. It's in how it's rolled or the type of paper it's written.
Fun fact.
I didn't.
Thank you for the edification.
I should say right now, I do not personally smoke pot.
Right.
Have I?
Because it's
in
not
the past?
legal. It's not legal.
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Have I also lived in a state where it was indeed legal? Yes, I did.
Yes.
But you could put the two together, and most people will have no problem with the prescribed painkiller.
Right.
But you take a blunt.
Right.
Or maybe another method of it. Even CBD, though. There's.
Right. Well, let's don't go there yet.
Okay. I'm so
I
excited about
know.
this
We're like racehorses today. Okay, let's just stay in the pot arena.
Okay.
THC proper. The deal is, we do know it's prescribed in the Bible that you don't do drunkenness. And I myself, I did not like, and I begged the Lord to help me with my controlled alcoholism, because I did not like the dissipation of the Holy Spirit within me, because you do lose a sound mind with alcohol.
That's very true.
So I'm not talking where you're so high that you're out of it, but there are lines, I mean, what happens when you cross those lines? So I don't drink. I don't drink anymore for that, because it was controlling me. It wasn't gladdening my face like it says in one of the Proverbs, I believe. So I totally, by the grace of God, had that day where He told me, it's over, and I just praised Him for it. My pot experience goes back when I was a high schooler. And of course, it was not legalized. But someone said, "Do you want to try it?" And I said, "Sure," because that's the kind of girl. But oddly enough, just another fun fact: I would not try mushrooms because I was really afraid of mushrooms. But I did try pot. The effects produced by pot did not leave. It left me slightly paranoid, but even worse, it was worse than that.
Pot left you paranoid?
Yeah, slightly, ever so slightly. I have a lazy eye apparently, and so that annoyed me more than anything. And I went, "This is not fun. This is not relaxing. I don't enjoy this." But other than that, it wasn't relaxing to me. And I have since learned. By an accidental cookie that I ate, and it's a long story, guys. And it's not denying.
It's a long story behind the cookie.
Yeah, behind the cookie. But I ate the cookie.
Ooh.
And I ate too much of the cookie, not knowing there was,
It was a laced cookie.
Well, not knowing that it was a cookie with a dosage recommended, and it was a very stressful time. And I took the cookie. Oh! And luckily, and I sat there and I debated. I really did debate. And guys, I'm just being honest. So, if you have problems with that, I'm okay with that too. But I sat there and looked at the cookie and went, "Oh, should I take that? What was that? Should I take half the cookie, the whole cookie?" Well, I thought, I take the whole cookie, I'm really in trouble because I don't know what. So I'll just take half the cookie. Well, as it turns out, I needed to only take like an eighth of a cookie.
You took the whole cookie?
I took the half a cookie.
Oh, no.
And so I proceeded to live this out. It did calm my nerves. I remember very distinctly, and I'm telling on myself for a reason, because I like honesty, and I'm not making light of the situation.
How many other, probably hundreds of people have done the same thing?
Just being legit. Like, I was really, really stretched to the max nerve-wise. It doesn't make excuse because we know the Lord can handle everything. I just reached finally. And I waited. I was like, I resisted. And then finally I just fell to the cookie. But what was interesting about it, and I found different about pot, and I don't know if this is everybody's, is whereas alcohol is a different, and I just remember this from years ago, because I've been, thank you, dear Lord, sober since 2001. with the exception of a pot incident, which I don't have trouble smoking pot. I really don't. I don't do it. Except for I did have the cookie. But I just noticed there was a big difference between the highs of them. Whereas alcohol, you're out of your mind. There was this snap-to-itness that happened with the pot. I'm not advocating being high either way. But so I'm wondering, with all the other substances that are given out to us legally,
if it were legalized, what if it were prescribed?
Right, and proper dosage.
Yes.
That you would not, all of a sudden find yourself smiling at the sink. But it made me wonder. It was my first time I went, wait, why are they giving everybody Ambien? I mean, no offense, but big pharma, but Ambiens and things like this when there's a natural product.
Well, and I think people also try to combat it so quickly, especially I see this most among believers with pot, and I'm not advocating everyone should just go try a blunt.
Yeah.
I personally don't think it's inherently wrong to even use marijuana to relax. Why do you take salt baths? Having a glass of wine, all these things that aren't bad, but it's the overconsumption of them and the abuse of them.
Right.
Obviously, it's important to know the effects that could have on you cognitively,
Right.
but also spiritually, because I think those are really intertwined.
It's really important.
So I'm also not advocating to just test trial stuff, because there's also a lot of what people would dub naturopathic, even in their healthcare or integrative medicine they use, or just things people naturally use to relax, to unwind, to help
I drink
their anxiety.
chamomile tea, and that's an herb.
But that's an herb.
Yeah.
But why is...
I guess there's a hallucinogenic quality about it that maybe is what is crossing the line.
You can also smell enough Sharpie and get high too. So I'm like, should I eliminate
this is true.
Sharpie from my life? Should I NyQuil and Benadryl that?
Yeah, you are exactly right. I mean, how many people take a Benadryl to go to sleep?
But with marijuana, it's bad because it makes you high.
Right.
But that's when I peel back and I question, what is it about being high per se that is, and again, right now I'm not advocating for getting crossed, getting high, but it's a legitimate question that I don't see a lot of the layers peeled back a whole lot on this. Like, what is morally wrong about being high? Are there different levels to it? Is it, if you're not thinking clearly, what if you feel a little buzzed and relaxed, when your eyes feel kind of warm and you feel that, are there different levels to it? Is it morally wrong altogether?
I do think,
should it only be used medically?
I do think being high to the point where you're out of your mind, drunk to the point you're out of your mind, and that does happen. I mean, when I had my cookie retreat, there was a point, the Lord brought me clarity. He was very gracious. And I said, Lord, please give me a sound mind, because I have really messed up here and I need to be functional. And he did. Now, have I turned to cookie since? No, I have not.
Turned to cookie. Where's the white chocolate macadamia?
But, and the deal is, I have really considered that. I was like, but what's the difference? What if someone took an edible and that was just, and I don't know how you say just slightly buzzed or just slightly relaxed.
Something that takes the edge off of the anxiety.
That takes, it is a glass of wine to their marijuana user. Or, because I don't know what it is about a cup of chamomile tea, but I will tell you that just soothes my soul.
But people don't look at that and say, oh, that's sinful. You should just read the Bible. And also, like, if you're exhausted and you naturally take a nap, people aren't going to point and say, rely on the Lord. It's like Jesus slept too.
He did.
And I'm not using this to say, oh, Jesus would take a joint.
Right.
But it's, oh man, it's...
Well, but it's the same way. Have you ever heard someone... I'm going to have that piece of chocolate cake because I really deserve it.
Yes. Gluttony.
Yeah.
Ooh. Chocolate, radical self-care, and salt baths.
I got to have dark chocolate, and which has been bona fidely proved, a special dark chocolate to be health beneficial, but in any high dosage is not good.
Yes.
You know, I mean,
obesity in America, anyone?
Can I just say
I'm sorry, but
can I say
double
Thanksgiving?
Right.
Yep. Where we practice the art of gluttony.
Thank you.
And we give ourselves permission to have 3 pieces of pie and our blood sugar is racing off the charts.
But also feasting in the Bible, you know?
Yeah.
But
yes,
I say
feasting.
touche to that because you're totally right.
Yeah.
We tend to tune out one piece of the equation and not the other. And I don't know if it's what society sees as really important at the time, or if we're living in a time where if something seems a little off the market, or if it's not legal in one particular state, you know, if something's not like legislated, that's a little bit more of a gray area.
Yes.
But I think even the research behind, and obviously research is always changing, but there have been proven effects from medical marijuana, even CBD.
Yes.
You know, I used to say not a derivative of marijuana, maybe.
I forget how it works, but yes, it's
in the family plant.
It's in the family.
The family tree.
Yeah.
The family leaf.
Like clozapam is to Klonopin, I believe.
But
maybe less than that.
A lot of people also think that it's unbiblical to take medication for mental illness, for anxiety, for depression, which obviously I have a very, very different stance on. Because how I see it is how something is being used. Just like you said, with food, with indulgence, you could say.
Right.
And I think it's what's the driving factor underneath it. Is it to soothe something? Is it to not feel anything?
Right.
Is it are you forever relying on that one thing? Could you eventually live without it? That's something that I have to ask myself too, because I love to run. I love to run. Yes. But I've realized, and we were talking about this the other night.
Yes, we were. We were talking about our binge exercises.
Hello, my name is Anna Grace Smith, and I'm not an addict, but I'm a dabbler, and I have been unhelpfully hooked on things in my life.
Such as
running. Yes, and exercise.
Yeah.
When I first started running, no joke, and this is like 8 years ago, so I would run, and you get that dopamine high.
Right.
It's a hit of dopamine, and that's what a lot of this stuff is. Food, drugs, alcohol.
Right. Sex,
yeah.
Except we don't know that. That's not happening. We're unmarried. That's not happening. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like these hits of dopamine, and it's interesting because even with running, you start to build a resistance. I don't want to say to it, but your body adapts so you can run more and more. And I would go for a long run, like 10 to 12 miles. Then I would go to the gym the same day, and I would do like another hour of cardio just because I wanted to, because I could, because I wanted to feel skinny. I wanted to feel, it helped me to escape. It felt like this escape, and I felt like on this high of life after. And I've healed radically from how I used to over-exercise. And everything linked with that, like my body image and a lot of the driving factors that made me just want to like run until I fell to the ground. But I've realized I have been tending to a little Achilles tendon injury coming off my marathon. And you would think that after a marathon, all you want to do is not run. But a few days after, you're like, all right, let's get back to it. Yay. Because it makes me feel good. I love to start the day with it. It's absolutely like my quiet time. It's like my sacred time, my happy time. Sometimes I think, whoa, running is, quote, my everything. And is that actually healthy? And in the 2.5 weeks that I have not been running and just cycling, the feelings that have like risen up within me to such pathetic levels. Like we're talking feeling like I'm wanting to crawl off my skin, like withdrawal from it. And not just now, I kind of miss it, but like I had 2 conversations with 2 other athletes who had experienced the same thing. One of them in particular, and we were just kind of bouncing off each other. And I told them, I said, I've wondered before, what if my legs stopped working and I couldn't run anymore? Would I be able to handle that? Or would I just turn to the bottle or something else just to feel a high, just to feel an escape?
Right.
So to bring that in with special greens, I think that with anything, is it used in such ways that it's a complement to your life and it's something that maybe enhances it and it adjusts the quality of life for you in positive ways, if that makes sense? Or is it something that you couldn't live without and you abuse? Because I think all the time we abuse things and we don't realize we're doing it.
Yes.
People can objectively see it, but until someone calls it out, or when you suddenly don't have it, when your Achilles is like, nope, you're not running for 2.5 weeks, and you are feeling like you're coming out of your skin to the point of almost like ugly crying, like freaking out over, oh my gosh, my sides, like, have I gained weight again? Just the things that you thought, oh, it's like 17-year-old me talking again.
Yes. All of a sudden you feel like that little kid.
I know that sounds like a rabbit trail, but I say that to emphasize, is there a place for even recreational marijuana, which I know is the medical topic of it, is sometimes a little more accepted even among church culture. Like, okay, well, if a doctor prescribes it, use
I'm
a
totally
medication.
a believer in it medically because
I am too.
I have seen
100%.
so many people, and I mean, if you follow the cancer trail of drugs, you end up with a large bottle of oxycodone.
Yes.
Or whatever it is, Oxycontin. I forget what they're called. And then after that, you're on a morphine drip.
Oh, and
they both take you out. And what I've heard about the marijuana bit is it doesn't take the pain away, but it does take the knowledge of the pain away. And it's not wiping out your memory card, but it is relaxing you where you're not so concerned about the pain.
And it's not killing off your kidneys and liver in the same breath.
Not doing all that. So I do think it does absolutely have a place medically. Yes. I also think it does have a place just right along with wine. But again, the thing is, what we're really at heart of this is everything is self-regulated by you.
That's very true.
It is personal responsibility.
Yep.
I realize the laws have to be changed and to include drunk driving or under the influence driving. It does influence a lot of different things, but ultimately it is personal responsibility. Is this good for me as a Christian?
Yep.
Is this the place I want to be as a Christian? Is this glorifying to the Lord? And I mean, I have to ask that of something. I remember you doing your running week. I needed to do something. I was about to crawl out of my skin. And for Tinkerbell, we couldn't go walking. It was running or it was super cold or something. And I just said, I got to go ballroom dance. And that sounds really silly. But it's just like we went straight through for hour 40. And we did double time. We did international. We just went fast and furious. And there would not be the right music. And I would say, let's do it. And we would just fly.
Can you spin me around you in the air?
And the ultimate compliment is when your instructor is kind of breathing heavy too. I'm like, yes, because that's where I wanted to be. And I needed to do something like that. But I mean, the same thing with reading. I need to, my bedtime routine, I do my stretches, and then I've got to read my 15 minutes of fiction, Christian fiction, and go to bed. I mean, that can be as, addicting as anything. Sometimes I think, oh God, wouldn't this be better spent on my knees? But I do think it comes back to us individually.
And I think
obviously we have to abide by the laws of the land because we are told that as Christians.
Right. Well, it's like God's law and the laws of the land. They kind of, I don't want to say intertwine as though every single thing the government says is of the Bible, but absolutely in that respect it is. I think oftentimes too, these different outlets are used as a form of escapism, even social media.
Oh, that's what I was talking about, even
scrolling,
the fiction.
Scrolling and scrolling, again, it's a dopamine hit. Yeah. So, and I don't think there's anything wrong with enjoying something either. And that's why I'm curious with recreational use of special greens, smoking pot.
Special greens.
There's so many. Well, how do you
Super
define
green.
a sound mind? Because that's really
that
the
is a
biggest
big one.
argument from Christian people. And I think it's completely legitimate question too. So anything where I'm pitting and saying, oh, well, church culture thinks this, I'm not at all trying to indicate that it's a dumb question people ask. I get why people sometimes have an automatic response or disapproval of it or see it as this bad thing, because I think we've seen the abuse of so many other quote unquote recreational drugs. And a lot of people who have come from your era even have seen the highs of that, no pun intended, but also the lows and losing people. I know people who have lost parents from addiction, but marijuana as compared to these other drug categories does function very differently.
It does.
And
I think
I'm wondering how do you define a sound mind? Because when that is the church's argument for, well, getting high is sinful because you do not have a sound mind. And compared to drunkenness, how do you define a sound mind?
I don't know.
Like, what is
and
that?
this just crossed my mind. You walk into most Christian, I'm not going to say most, many Christian households right now. What is on in your ears 24/7?
Right.
The TV.
Yep. And music.
And music.
Yep.
Well, and I'm
culture.
guilty. Pop culture music. But definitely the drone of your choose your favorite drug on TV, or your binge.
Yes.
All that. So is that being in the sound mind when you are?
That's so good.
I know.
Preach it.
I mean, seriously, I think a sound mind, I mean, really, we're really torn. I think we're really torn as people, and I think the Lord is so gracious because I desperately want to walk like Brother Andrew in the presence of the Lord. And then there's sometimes I'm just so exhausted, but it's not up to me. And I think it's up to me to, practice the presence. That means I've got to. But you do have to make space. So with the TV on, with an overloaded system of alcohol, or as you call them, what do you call them, special greens, or whatever. Too much
Mixed
coffee.
greens.
I mean, too much coffee.
It's
where
not
you
arugula.
too much coffee where you can't sit still.
Yes. Like I say as I fidget and contort myself for the 20th time in this chair.
Well, we're working on our posture.
And cracking. Oh, it felt good.
So, I mean, the deal is, I think we need to look at a sound mind is, are we leaving space perhaps for the Holy Spirit to enter in? Though the Lord is so gracious. I mean, he came to me in my cookie moment at the sink, but he's come to me other times and just whispered in my ear in a moment of just sheer mundane tasks that had to be permitted. Not had to be permitted, had to be done, whether it's, sweeping, vacuuming, whatever you want to call it.
Do you think marijuana could enhance someone's spiritual life? But seriously, do you think it could?
I don't even pretend to go there. No, I think the only thing that enhances our spiritual life is the Holy Spirit.
Well, I shouldn't say enhance. Let me rephrase that because that just sounds really woo.
That does sound real woo.
Enhance your spiritual life. I shouldn't say that as though you're trying to channel
that's what I think people do with LSD. They try to enhance their.
Let me rephrase that then.
Universe. Yeah.
Not enhance, but for example, I know a lot of Christian people who drink wine. I love to have a glass of wine to unwind on the weekend. So after I've gotten all my runs in, I love to have just a social drink or a glass of some Chardonnay or Merlot because I think it's really relaxing, and I don't use it to decompress because obviously there's weeks upon weeks I go without it. I'm not addicted to it. But I do like how I feel when it brings me just down. Or even going on a long flight or something where I know I'm going to want to sleep and relax a bit. But what I mean by enhance is when I'm more relaxed, I feel like I actually am more prayerful. My thoughts don't feel so scattered, if that makes sense.
I see what you're
because
saying.
it's really hard for me to focus. Yeah. And I'm not even suggesting to smoke a joint or drink wine just to focus, just to pray, because there are disciplines to be taken, I think, to reach that point. And I don't think it looks linear on everybody. But there has been the question of marijuana and creativity. Like songwriters will use it to supposedly amp up their creativity. But
well, let me go back to something I just thought about. Yeah. I had a relative as a child who was very, very active. And it was suggested, I mean, what do they see when they see a young man who, a little kid, particularly male, being hyperactive, because school doesn't fit that model. Right. For them to sit in the seat for 6 hours and be quiet. They go, Ritalin. He needs some sort of, he's hyperactive.
Except for like ADHD?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And that was the old school one. I forget what all the new ones are. There's Vyvanse or something. There are all these other ones. So they immediately assign a drug so that they can focus.
Touché.
Yeah. And I later on in this person's life, I realized there was some activity going on, and someone said, well, this person's just compensating. They're self-medicating because their brain is just always, 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 always going. And I've seen this in several loved ones that I know. And that when I say loved one, that encompasses friends, other people. But they saw that the use of marijuana actually just brought them to a state of calm enough where they could focus.
Ooh.
And so I'm thinking, we medicate so many other things in certain ways. Why isn't this, is it enhancing focus?
Maybe it's subjective for a person too.
It seems to be. I mean, to me, it obviously the overdose of the cookie, and I don't say that lightly because there are people who are listening, and I am so sorry for being crass about that, and I didn't mean it in a crass way, but it was most certainly too much, whatever it was for me. But who have lost people to overdose, and it's heartbreaking. I have. Mm-hmm. And it is very, 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 very hard, very difficult. And you can overdose in a lot of different ways.
Absolutely.
With a lot of different drugs. But it just makes me wonder why it's being denied so often and so much.
Well, and it makes me wonder too why even, because I think it's a very fair comparison with something like ADHD medication versus something that is even more natural. Yeah. Could grow in your backyard if you're in California, right. Colorado, Oregon, etc. Mm-hmm. But I love the argument from, again, personal experience, church people in the church is that medication that's prescribed and anything drug related like marijuana on either end of the spectrum, they deem it to be sinful and you're not having enough faith in God. But how I see it is we live in the 21st century where technology is always progressing. Mm-hmm. We don't live in the early 20th century where we didn't have as much access to what we have. So it's like we're forced to face things in the 21st century that we didn't have to 100 years ago or in ancient times. So I see it as society progresses, sometimes even how our brain functions. I think there are needs to be brought to, I don't want to say a low, but to be brought down to a more neutral place because you have the rise of technology, social pressure, just the mentality and pace of life. We live in a very technological world where we're overstimulated. Whether we're even scrolling or not, constantly we're overstimulated by things that I think we're not even consciously thinking about, from driving to working to being at a computer all day, even human survival. And I think that as the times progress, also there are mental health downfalls with that we can't always help, you know.
But I also you have to remember, and well, you didn't live this long ago, and nor did I, but throughout time, herbs have been used medicinally.
Yeah.
I mean, throughout times. I mean, think about the embalming situations that went on, you know, with the Egyptian pharaohs and all that. And the health care that they would do for people, it all was herbal. I mean, the herbal garden was a standard that you needed for medicine. So, you know, I don't know why we're putting up such a stink about it.
No pun intended again.
It is stinky. That is something.
Skunk in Starbucks if they had a baby. That's the marijuana leaf.
It is stinky. But so are cigarettes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then people say they're bad for you, and they are bad. And you know, the whole thing of taking something in your lungs, I think is bad.
I do too. Like, I have no desire.
Yeah.
If North Carolina legalized marijuana, I still really would not have the desire to take a puff.
Yeah. No.
I did that in my earlier 20s, and the idea of smoke being in my lungs is now other components of it, like the tinctures, CBD, which huge fan of CBD. Right. And again, anything you can get, I think, hooked on or overuse. But I think it's the underlying why are you using it? Is it to escape something? Is it to numb? Is it to not feel? Because with alcoholism,
I think it's a little bit of all of it.
All of it, yeah.
You know? And I really don't know how to, you know, I guess we, you know, like you're saying, we have two hopes. We either lean on the Lord or we lean on that, or sometimes maybe there's a combination of, not both, because we don't believe it's, you know, the Lord, but having
but it's like it's a cliche saying now, but it's okay to have Jesus and a therapist. But it's like, what kind of role is it playing in your life? Is it replacing, and are you giving all the power to that one thing, whatever it is?
That is it. I think that is, who is your idol?
Yeah.
And what are you worshiping? Because if you're putting something above the Lord, then there's the problem. That's why I quit drinking alcohol. And that's why I will not eat a big cookie ever again.
Well, I think that's why a lot of people, especially for me to bring up, even on Instagram, should marijuana be legal? I put that as a poll on my story yesterday. I was like, I just want a head count. And it was interesting. It's about half and half for yes. Most people are believers too who voted.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Others said, no, absolutely not. There's no place ever. But I think that marijuana is one of those topics, again, like when people hear the word, they almost associate it with the party scene, using it like to get crossed. Because the first time I smoked pot in my earlier 20s, I wasn't using it as a way to just decompress. I was absolutely depressed in my life. I was in a safe circle of friends of mine. And we all were going through, we had hit rock bottom in our own special ways. And I remember just feeling so, I would migrate between feeling really, really, really overwhelmingly depressed and really, 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 really numb. And it's like I wanted to feel something, but I couldn't figure out what. Right. Because I didn't necessarily just want to feel positive emotions, because it didn't change my reality. Because it was a season, it was when I was still in Los Angeles. And I was deciding, do I want to stay here? Do I want to break up with the city? Like, a relationship of mine had ended. I was just faced with like all these decisions. My savings account was drained. I felt just dirty on the inside because I had become a version of myself I really didn't ever think I'd become. And I remember with these friends, like, we passed around this homemade joint. How I didn't walk away with mono or mouth herpes, I don't know, because we all just passed it around and shared it. And I remember, like, it was one of those nights where it wasn't a party per se, but I mean, I had quite a few alcoholic drinks in my system. And then on top of it, more pot. And I always thought pot was gross. I thought it smelled bad. I totally judged people too. It does. I totally judge people who, you know, you walk past and you're like, oh, they clearly they're clearly lit over there. You have the kind of skunk Starbucks smell. But I thought it was trashy, had zero desire. But it was this point where I thought, I just don't even care. I'll try whatever. Who cares? My reality's the same. So I wanted to have fun, and I also wanted to feel absolutely nothing. So I just took as many drinks as I wanted, as many puffs as I wanted. But the interesting thing is, I remember when that night was over, I woke up on a friend's couch. I thought, what the bleep happened? And my second thought was, oh no, my coat is going to smell like weed and my mother is totally going to know. But I also had no desire to do it ever again. I didn't feel at first this inherent guilt from it.
Right.
I didn't feel like I did something that was horribly wrong. But later I realized that my underlying feelings for it and why I chose to get completely crossed out of my ever living mind and ate my friend's entire box of ice cream sandwiches and broke a teapot and cried into a pillow. Why? That was maybe a problem.
Wow.
So
that beats my cooking story.
Well, it was interesting. But it's funny because with some things like that, where you have supposedly the time of your life, you think, oh, I want to do that again. And it's not that I don't think, wow, I wish marijuana were legalized, because I think for myself and anxiety levels with certain seasons of life, if it were within a medical type prescription or used as something just to take the edge off, I think it would be beneficial, and I'm not against it in that kind of way. But for the party scene, or just to try absolutely everything just because you can. Because for me, it was this moment of, I have all the free will that I want. I'm emotionally, financially independent of everyone. I'm just home for the holidays. And so why not?
Right.
So my underlying feelings weren't even, for me, I think maybe it was an escape, or just being with other people who are going through a hard time. But I think it's when you begin to use something like that, like that's the time where it's obviously not being used in a healthy kind of way, because I remember the night very clearly, but sound mind, no way. There was no way. I remember my friend said, you were not driving home tonight, Anna.
Which is a blessing.
And a friend recorded part of it, and I kept saying, please don't tell my mother. Please. I did tell my mother.
Well, now she knows.
And that's not me saying that even just to share, oh, it's a funny, lit story of it. But it's like, what's the purpose of doing it? Right. Because if my only purpose in smoking pot or even drinking, is it bad for me to have a spiked beverage or a glass of wine? No, it's not. But is it? It
is for some people.
It is for some people. Yeah.
I think that's it. That's where it's permissible here. It's
yep.
And there's that beneficial part. But I was just thinking when you were talking about that, because sound mind is the ruling thumb or guide for this. But I was even thinking, when people, there's certain things that we binge on that are not, well, I mean, you think for sex, what is the response of a lot of people when they get divorced or they're lonely, is they seek company.
Yeah.
And they have sex, and that's clearly against the Lord's will for our lives. But you can't justify that. It's a tricky gray area not with sex, but with, recreational whatever, drugs, drinking. But I think, again, it really does go back to, one, we have to follow the authorities of our nation, or not even our nation, because that's all kind of weird, because the states are doing it, but the nation isn't.
Yeah, it's weird.
Or at the very least, our state. But I also think we have a higher calling, and that's to honor the Lord. I mean, we are supposed to, I was joking with you, I was saying, we were bought at a price, and that's referring to how we use our body. I believe it's in context sexually, but I think it's a good guideline on everything. We were bought at a price. Is this going to deflect from me glorifying the Lord? Will someone see this and say, "Oh, she can't be a Christian"? I think that's very important. Would you smoke a joint around somebody who knows you as a Christian?
But is that also based upon someone's perception of you because they're in that?
Yeah.
I don't want to say
But if
cognitive dissonance.
But if it makes them stumble.
True.
You know,
but are they putting themselves in an environment with you too? But it also, you're right though, because it really does. I think the environment in which you're doing something is, and having respect for other people, knowing that some things really are these taboo topics, including alcohol. Right. I know you joked the other day saying, oh, I hate when people say, does this bother you? Because I totally asked you that. But I really did mean it, because I do respect people who have the self-control to not do something.
It's God. It's God.
Well, and that's totally like a holy fruit, Batman.
It is. It really is good.
No, seriously, when people have those sorts of spiritual boundaries, and especially people who are recovered, you know, who have broken from the chains of alcoholism, drug addiction, I think it is really important to be empathic towards that.
I do agree, because at any moment I could stumble and fall.
Right.
And I you know,
but if we only worried about what everyone thinks, we should care about what people think in one aspect, but also when is it people pleasing and just, oh, I don't want to offend anyone, when also it could be a conversation opener. It could. Should we have like smoked a joint to start this episode?
It's not legal interstate. So
we're not in Colorado or California.
But I do think the Lord is our guide here. And I mean, the laws are our guide.
Would you vote for marijuana to be legalized in North Carolina?
Yes, I would.
My name is Anna Grace Smith, and I would too.
Yeah. We're probably.
But.
Probably. Hi. We would wear those little stickers. Hi, I voted for pot today.
I voted for pot. Can have like a green.
I would like to know. And we did this without any research, and we did it again with all the respect and love and care and concern for the families out there who have lost people, to their children who have smoked some marijuana or pot or whatever, smoked something, and it's been laced with fentanyl. So this is not even in our discussion. No,
and not even encouraging people to try it is not our goal. Not at all.
Not at all. But I'm just wondering, you know, I would love for someone to come out and talk to us about the war going on, you know, between, I'm serious, Big Pharma and the industry, because I hope I don't end up dead. If I did, please come back to this segment. But you know, that it doesn't seem right to be just. And another thing I do want to point out, particularly in the mental health era, when it seems to me sometimes a nice special green would have been a better choice, because the up and down of being given medicine, taken off medicine, all this other stuff, and then people playing with it when they know what their body's going through trauma and they need something. And these are people who are believers, but there are things going on in their mind. We know that 2020 is bringing a tsunami of broken people because of everything that went on. But it seems literally insane. You walk in to when you are on the edge of a nervous breakdown or something. And I have a friend who is like that, who walked in and is prescribed this, that, and the other, takes it, it's just, and then they're trying different medications. All this stuff is playing around, and it is just unstable. Whereas it seems to me that perhaps a medicinal herb would have been a better choice.
If the stigma were erased, and if it were under boundaries too. Yeah. I think that's the thing, like when things have no boundaries around them, there's always catastrophe that's going to follow. You can see it all throughout history. And I think that's why, like, God's law are boundaries for our lives for a purpose. It's not just rules just to somehow like take the fun out of life. It's literally to protect you even as a human being, spiritually, physically. And I see it in the same way with something like marijuana. If it were legalized, having boundaries with it so that it can be used properly. People will still abuse it. People will still abuse anything, though. There will never be a perfect world where something is legalized. There's something taboo like this that people take to, and it's not abused in some form or fashion. But I think there can be steps made to at least eradicate the stigma attached to it, or begin to.
Well, for example, let's just take it down a notch. Antibiotics.
Yes.
We used to give them out. People used to give them out like candy, and now we've on this big thing. We've made our bodies resistant. I was raised as a mother. When I was a mother of my sweet little precious children, when we were told, you don't work in peanut butter, you don't work in eggs, you don't work in spices, because we're afraid of the reactions that this is going to bring to these sweet, precious babies. Come along, my grandson. Everything. I remember seeing at 6 months, he was either eating egg or some sort of peanut butter product. I'm like, no. They're like, what are you talking about? We entered, our pediatrician entered this into his diet. They've totally reversed on that. And you look at the allergies that people have that are my children's age. It's egg, it's peanuts, it's everything that we took away, and their bodies weren't developed with immunities. So they go back and forth on research. Should I put my baby face down or my baby face up? It flip-flops every 10 years. So what I'm saying to you is, I think we're not even giving, I hate to say this, we're not even giving pot a chance.
We're not even kidding. But it's true.
Yeah.
And it's interesting too, though, because with the conversation we've had on the overconsumption, with what you just said, I think reflects that, because on the flip side, if the research on marijuana could change 10 years from now too, and it could sound like the thing that's like, oh no, this causes
this,
X, Y, or Z, which is why I think, again, I think that's the importance of also not being hooked on anything, whether it's big pharma medication. And I'm not saying that as a generalization for people who need these types of drugs.
There are
to
definite
absolutely
drugs that are absolutely necessary. Like, I'm sorry, my blood pressure medicine is necessary. I tried it for so long, but my body was not going to have it.
And I think that it's interesting how there are certain medications that have a stigma attached to them, especially if it's for mental health. But when which really does coincide with your physical health.
They call it necessary, because I was asked that with a certain person. She's allowed necessary medicines, which means diabetes, blood pressure, but not the thing that keeps her at that moment that she's been taking. She would have to detox down from it.
That's rough. Yeah. And coming off medication too.
That's a real reality. I mean, there's no cold turkey in that. And so, unfortunately, so many people are.
We're not scientific prescribers or medical field junkies, but would you say the moral of the greens, the moral of the leaf, the moral of the blunt? To be blunt.
To be blunt.
Blunt with you.
What would be the moral of it? I definitely think there ought to be, and this is not a biblical moral, but it's too easy to simply say, well, God created it, therefore it's good. Right. He also created poison ivy, but we also have to remember all these things that he did create in Eden before the fall were good. Everything has corrupted after the fall. So, but the thing is, okay, so here it is. It has been proven medically that it can help. I have seen it with people, with cancer patients, that it does help. Medical marijuana does help. I have seen it calm ADHD people down and not take them out of the room where they can't think, but just steady state. Why are we not allowing this and thinking about it in a different tone? But I think everything really does go back to what is pleasing and glorifying to the Lord. And a sound mind is. So, I mean, I don't know. I'd rather you answer what is the moral to this
I think
story?
it's one of those questions that I'd be interested for other people's perspective on, because it's easy to look at something like this and say, yes, it's good. No, it's bad.
Right.
Yes, it's sinful. No, it's holy.
Right.
I think it's absolutely, and will continue to probably be a gray area. I think it's in how something is used. And I think what it boils down to for me is, why are you doing it? Is it a void filler? Is it escapism? Is it a numbing tactic? Is it something that is actually helping you even in your walk, like with God? And again, I'm not saying that like people could say, well, shrooms open my eyes spiritually. I've heard that before, actually.
Oh, no. I had the opportunity. I said no because I didn't want my mind open that way.
Well, I think and
that was years ago.
Well, I think
you didn't offer to me.
Well, I think with the brain too, like there's so many things that you can be influenced by that can have a positive or negative effect. But just because something even feels good or gives you some sort of illusion doesn't mean it's good. But I think is it stripping you of reality too? Is that the thing?
That is.
There's so many questions that go into it, and there's so many different forms besides just smoking a homemade roll of pot in your friend's living room.
That's true.
Or eating a cookie that takes you from your kitchen to the rooftop.
Which is not a plan.
Pluto, which is not a plan. Oh, that's a good. Also, let's talk about the moon landing.
Yeah,
just kidding. I'm totally
next
joking.
week.
Next week we have conspiracy
talk about
craps.
JFK.
Oh no!
I think it was a great topic. I think we would. I know for sure we would appreciate feedback on this, because we're investigating.
Is it a gray area? Do you think it's morally wrong? If so, why? Do you think it is morally good? Can it be used for good, medically, recreationally? Let us know in the comments below.
Yes.
Give a like and subscribe to Moral Tea Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Yes.
Cheers.
Cheers
to our empty
mine's not
grains of Saints and Sippers
coffee.
Our
wonderful coffee.
Yay.